Hey everybody, this is Brent Ingersoll and you are listening to the Speaking Of podcast. Today, my guest is a good friend of mine named Heather Semple. Heather is a pastor at 12 Stone Church, a church that I love because that's the church of my mentor, Pastor Kevin Myers, and she's gone there to join him after an incredible ministry as a senior pastor in Wisconsin. Heather is just an unbelievable leader. She's a great friend and she is a wellspring of knowledge. I think you're going to enjoy this conversation. Here it is, my conversation with Heather Semple. First thing I wanted to talk to you just like to kind of get, as a, just by way of update even, I was trying to think today, is it 2 years now you've been in Atlanta?
It was 2 years in August.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. It's going fast.
It's like fast and very slow. It's both like simultaneously.
COVID slow.
There's a part. Yeah. Oh my goodness. It feels like, it was yesterday, and then it feels like I've been here my whole life.
Right.
It's a little over 2 years.
Wow.
And in the 2 years, so much has happened. And maybe that's why it feels like a lifetime.
Yes.
So much has shifted and changed.
For you personally, in the world, all of it.
All of it.
So that's what I wanted to ask you, like for people who wouldn't know you, a lot of people like associated with King's Church know you because you've been here a couple times now.
Yes.
And you were supposed to be here this year, but COVID. So someday we will get this marriage conference going again. But you were the senior pastor, lead pastor in Wisconsin, and it's just one of those amazing, really just an unusual God story, like a very large church, really not in a highly populated area. Like it made the city of St. John that I live in feel like a bustling metropolis in comparison, I think, to where you were in Wisconsin. What was the Rice Lake? Is that where it was?
Yeah, Rice Lake, Wisconsin. But we were only about an hour south of Canada. So, but small town. About, if I'm generous, about 10,000 people.
Wow.
I know. And we were there for, how long were we there for? 11 years.
Wow.
We were there. The whole time I wasn't the senior pastor, about half of that time I was on staff. But yeah, 11 years there. And it's such a weird thing. When we lived there, I was very at home in my role, kind of in my sweet spot, senior pastor. God was doing amazing things. It was an unexpected, never thought that's what I would do, yet God invited me into it and it was awesome. But I don't know, just the small town never felt like home, but the church.
Right.
And what I did felt so much like home.
Mm-hmm.
We moved a little over 2 years ago. So now we're here at 12 Stone, and it's weird because so I often I wonder what God's doing, because where we live now feels like we've lived here forever. It feels very much like home.
Right.
Which is a little bizarre, but
so you left like, again, it's almost like I'm a sports guy. So, Jordan kind of left the Bulls where he was really like peaking, right? And like you left your role there in a time where, leaders usually leave, a lot of the time it's they've been trying for the last few years, they've plateaued or it's declined, or maybe they're wanting the downshift because they're getting old, or all the reasons that are usually present for people to leave and take a role, frankly, on a team. You aren't the lead pastor at 12 Stone.
Right.
And, so what was it that made you, obviously God, but I'd love to hear like what the process was of making that shift. And then more importantly, the 2 years of, okay, God, you've got me here, why, and what are you learning, and what is he showing you in that transition?
Honestly, and I don't want to be spiritually trite or over spiritualize this, but I would tell you the reason I'm here is because God unmistakably told me to and instructed Kevin Myers to ask me to.
Right.
And I knew a few months before I resigned at Red Cedar in Rice Lake that the Lord was releasing me. I just had that stirring in my soul. In January of 2018, I was away on a solo solitude prayer retreat, and I'd already had some kind of restlessness in me that I've learned to associate with God's bringing a transition. I just knew it, but I didn't know what. And then on a solitude retreat, he was very clear that he was releasing me.
Wow.
And so but also very clear that I wasn't really supposed to do anything about it, meaning like sit still, because I would then think, okay, great. Well, then I need to start making a plan and start figuring out what this is going to look like and all these things. And I just was very clear that I was supposed to just be still.
Right. Which is interesting. I mean, let's talk about that, because I think that's, by the grace of God, you were having dialogue with him as a leader and as a pastor and as a person in a way that all of us have caught up to in the last year with the pandemic, because, we didn't sign up for this to happen or this change to happen, but the landscape of ministry as we know it has shifted. And so you were already processing, how do I follow Jesus? How do I find fulfillment? What does it look like in this new iteration? I'm not preaching every week like I was. And, I've been discovering over the last however many months, I don't even know how many months pandemic is. You can see it in my eyes, but
it's like dog years.
Yeah.
It's like pandemic years.
But I was telling a friend last night on the way home from basketball, just on a personal level, I've realized how much of my own faith has been based on adrenaline and based on being in front of people and needing a crowd and having instant feedback. And not that it was a bad thing. It wasn't disingenuous or fake, but it was built and reliant so much on that rhythm of being in front of people and preparing. And, I'm preaching still, but it's not the same. And I've had to learn.
Oh, that's so good.
Faithfulness,
and it's so true.
In this season.
I remember, and we even kind of had some conversations, you and I, with some other friends of ours that are pastors about, this was a few years ago, just coming to this place where we're in this cycle of adrenaline, this weekly rhythm of platform preaching, things are up and to the right, and just the exhausting nature of that kind of faith, the exhausting nature of that kind of rhythm with the Lord. And even a few years ago, I was just, even though on the outside, it looked so wonderful and a role in a church that so many leaders would have died for, just loved to be in. There was just a big part of me that thought, Lord, I don't know what you're doing, but if this is what it is to lead the modern day church, if it's just a 7-day cycle of hit the home run, feed off of that, but watching, massive numbers get added to a spreadsheet, yet not what I would say the equivalent of disciples.
Yes.
Coming through was disheartening and a little disillusioning, I would say.
Yeah.
And so I really, and I think, the way that we think and the way we're trained is just always trying to figure out, well, then I need to figure something out to fix it. I need to figure out something out to fix it. And I just could never quite figure out the solution for that. And I think with season that we're in right now, post-COVID, I think God is doing what none of us could figure out.
Yeah, for sure.
You know what I'm saying? He's going, well, all of you've been trying, you've all wondered these things, all asked these questions.
Yeah.
And don't even ask them out loud. We ask them behind closed doors and small groups of leaders, do you feel this way? Do you think this? Are you wondering what to do with this? Especially in larger churches. And then here we are, and God has just literally brought everything to a standstill.
Yeah. And
we've had to rethink everything.
Yeah. And he's forced us to have to tweak the model and the metrics too. And that's what I've been finding is how much satisfaction and fulfillment and gratification that I was getting from the old measuring tools, right? And we knew the right answers. Like, well, no, we're not just about seeing church growth. We care about discipleship. We care, and I think we did in as much as we knew to care. But once the tide went out, what's that Warren Buffett's quote? Like, when the tide goes out, you see who is swimming without shorts. And it's like, all of a sudden this went away and a bunch of churches were exposed. And that was our case. When the pandemic hit, we punched lockdown in the face because we just invested in online and we had the infrastructure to keep going. That was great. But once it shifted into like this sort of nebulous middle zone of it's still a reality, we can't have services like we want or did, what do we do? And like, we really were exposed for not having some real core community health built in our church, and I found that in my own life. Like, it's not just that the church was exposed, like the rhythms and disciplines of my own life were exposed.
Yes.
And that I was just riding the wave of being in this church cycle for better and worse. And this has been a season of really having to like deal with, like, I don't know if I really know how to keep the fire of my soul raging hot without that mechanism. And it's been tough. But what have you learned, because I think you had a head start in some of this, because I remember when you were here for a Harvest Conference a year and a half ago, you were new into the role there, and you were just at like the beginning stages of processing, like, okay, who am I and what does it mean to follow Jesus now that like that, capital L leader things changed and I'm not at the front of this like move of God and I'm not preaching every weekend and like what, and help me. How have you like learned where have you learned to kind of find that, like, how to abide in a more pure, holistic way than maybe in the past? What has God showed you through that transition?
Yeah, well, I've got it all figured out.
Good.
So I've got no, I'm kidding. I'm like, well, this is great because I do not have this all figured out. But I can tell you a couple of things that I've learned. Well, I knew, here's the thing, and this is what happens. Like, God speaks, we hear him, and we say, yes, I'm all in because I've heard God speak. But then what we think and how we've interpreted what he has said over time reveals itself to be quite different. He knew what he meant, and I just placed some assumption on what he meant.
I've never done that.
But. So, what he distinctly spoke to me before I came here was actually Jeff and I, like the month before I said yes to this role here. And I knew that I'd been given an offer. And Jeff and I were on this bucket list trip in Italy with some friends. It was like this thing that we'd always wanted to do. And so we were there and we were in this vineyard in Tuscany, which is like, what is my life? I don't even know how I got here.
You're in a book right now.
I know. And, we were walking through the vineyard and we were experiencing some teaching simultaneously as well from John 15 of the vine. So we were in that simultaneously. And it's fascinating. It's just a fascinating thing to do.
Was that like Christine Kane? Was that
was a different trip. This was kind of a thing that evolved off of that. But, and I really distinctly felt the Lord draw my attention to the grapes in the vineyard. And he, was saying to me, Heather, this is the season you've lived in, this great, beautiful season. There were pictures all over the walls of this vineyard building, of the grapes. And that was their claim to fame, is they just had the best. And he was like, this is where most leaders like to live.
Right.
In the visible, beautiful, sweet stage. And he's like, my invitation to you, is going to be different because the point of the vineyard is never the grapes. It's always the wine. It's never to settle for this stage. And will you let me take you down into the cellar, into obscurity, and to being broken, and to sitting and just aging, so that you can come out a deep, rich, matured, new kind of wine.
Wow.
And I mean, that is so sealed upon my heart and my mind, and God speaks, I think, that way to us. Sometimes we don't get that all the time, that distinct visual picture. And you know what it's like when you get that, you cling to it.
Yeah.
And so he said that to me, and I was like, great, Lord, let's do it. Deepen me, mature me. I'm all about it. Wine, and like when I saw you at Harvest, I think I was like 6 months in, and I was ready to be like the $3.99 Boone's Strawberry Hill over in the gas station kind of wine.
Sure.
I was like,
yeah.
get me the heck out. This is horrifying. But I think, and I could tell you, like, I really had, and I felt like I was pretty sure of my identity and pretty secure in that. But what, like you said, and you put it really well, so I'm grateful because I'm going to sit in that, is that I've really had to wrestle with, like, how and what my faith is tied to.
Right.
And can I guess I should say this, my prayer, especially lately, has been, Lord, rather than far distance and feeling far from you in the midst of desert and in the midst of a cellar and in the midst of a barrel, I want to know what it is to be near to you in those times. Because historically for me, when I find myself in a barrel and I can't see what's on the outside, I don't know when or if they're ever going to come for me, right? You don't know. I always tend to feel distant from the Lord, like he's not working.
Yeah.
And he's not, like, why don't I see? And my prayer in recent months has been, well, and when I read of people in scripture and I read biographies and I read of great saints and I read of all of that, they talk about this nearness and this closeness of God in darkness and when sight ceases.
Mm-hmm.
And so my prayer is, when sight ceases, does my faith increase?
Right. Wow.
And he has me sitting in that. And because every deadline I felt like I had, or I thought that God was going to meet, he hasn't.
Yeah.
And I very distinctly feel like he's saying, you're just not getting this, Heather. You're just not getting this. Like, there's a nearness and an intimacy that he's like, I need you to understand and to know that is unthreatenable.
Right.
That is like unshakable.
Yeah. You're saying so much that's resonating with me. And I think for people who aren't like pastoral leaders too, I mean, we're all kind of in this, I mean, this year, I think for most people, there's the very few exceptions who have, like, 2020 is going to be the best year they ever had. They, they're shareholders at Amazon or something. Other than that, I think the rest of us,
for sure,
the rest of us are like, this sucks. But, the idea of, like, the wine, it's like we know that, this is the standard, this is the invitation, we get to be this, but we want to skip the crushing and the cellar stuff. And I mean, I've been even praying, as you know, and as you have as well, like praying for revival in our region. And, I've never seen or read about a revival that's happened independent from, like, some type of crisis, or it's never happened. But I was kind of hoping this would be the one instance that revival would come and we would just skip the crushing part. But it doesn't seem to be the historical standard. So I've been praying, okay, Lord, if this is the crushing, then get it. A guy actually from New Spring Church down near where you guys are, I think in South Carolina, Clayton King texted me this morning, which I don't really know him that well. I've only met him a couple times, just texted a nice encouragement and, asked, what are you praying about these days? And I said, my prayer has been, God, if I feel like I'm on the operating table, So while you're in there, get everything, like if there's something else wrong with me or something else you need to show me or something else we need to sew up or get rid of, please do it now. And then can you wrap it up? It's kind of my prayer.
I know.
But it is that sort of trusting the Lord in the waiting and knowing that it's not for naught and that it's unto something and he's not wasting this. He is working in it, but it is tough. I identify with how you feel like when you're in the barrel, like it does feel like, man, I'm like forgotten down here. And am I supposed to be here? And there's so much of what you're saying has just been the journey that I think so many of us are on right now. And you said something about just sort of sitting in it. And I think that's a great way to sort of typify how I've been processing. Like it seems like God has forced a fast of sorts for me, that the way I experience him is not going to be running or flying or soaring like right now. It's just going to be sitting. Like it's not been signs and wonders. It's not been crowds and evangelism. It's been like just like the slow sense that he's there. And I've never at any point in the last 8 or 9 months legitimately felt abandoned. I've felt confused or like what the crap, but not abandoned at any point. Like I've always felt his nearness. It's looked different. Intimacy with him is taking new definitions. It's looking more mature, I think. Like, I don't know, you remember when you're probably like, we're dating Jeff. I remember when I was dating Melanie, like intimacy early on looks like fluttering hearts and it looks like dates and it's wild and fast and moving. It looks different now, 15 years in, right? 20 years in, it looks intimacy means more. It's slower, it's grounded. And in a similar way, I've been sensing that with the Lord on a personal level. And I think with the church too. Like, I think he's just interested in a more mature bride, and I think he's forced.
Yes. And, I don't know, because I don't have I wish I knew the why behind all that it appears God is doing, and all the things that have been shut down, whatever, stripped away. But, and I've talked to a couple of pastors, and what's interesting, especially in larger churches with all that's happened, I don't know what it's like here, but we are back in person here, but we're at like, I would say, maybe 15%.
Yeah, that's us too.
And so there's almost this sense when I talk to pastors that are like, everything I built is done and gone. And am I really going to have to start over? But I think it's not that everything's falling apart. It's just so revealing of what reality actually was.
Oh, yeah.
Like, no, this is actually what was.
Yeah.
This was who was actually the church.
Yep.
And God is just sifting and sifting and sifting, including leaders.
Yeah.
Sifting like, can you walk with me in the desert without wanting to go back to Egypt? Like, can you actually do that when I've given you zero picture of a promised land? And to your point of revival, I remember, oh my goodness, I just thought every time we held a service, that was going to be when God opened up the heavens and like thousands of people were going to flock in, and there were going to be all these signs and wonders, and it was going to be the story that everybody told. And oh my goodness, it just didn't appear that that's what God, it looks like up to something very, very different. And my hope is that it is nothing we've ever seen or could predict.
Yeah.
It would seem
it
to be different.
It probably will look different. I do think that there will be on the other side of this. Like I think we will come out of the barrel. I think that there will be a great harvest on the other side of this.
Yeah.
And I really do believe that. And we will feel the feeling of momentum again someday. Like that will happen. But I don't think God's going to let us skip this process. And I think he's actually building us to be able to actually carry more, and it's funny. Again, we love to detach reality, like that, whether it's detaching revival from the need of crisis and crushing, or even like fruitfulness. I mean, you've experienced it. I've experienced it growing a church from, 500, 600 to a couple thousand. You know the feeling of, it really is true. Like more people, more problems, more money, more problems, in the word of the prophet Biggie.
Yeah.
It's actually true. And yet we've been praying, God, send the thousands. And it's like, you don't want that. You aren't built for that. That'll kill you.
Right.
And I wonder if God is in that sifting of the church, like building us to where we are disciples who can handle more. We can take the responsibility of bearing more people's burdens and reaching more people. I mean, you're getting into people's mess. It's not clean to invite hundreds of new people into your community or thousands of people. It's messy. People are messy.
Super messy. So, and everything's really messy right now.
Well, that's a great spot to segue, because I wanted to ask you about the election. I want as a Canadian peeking over the fence,
Nobody really knows if it's over. I mean, half the nation thinks it's over, half the nation thinks it's not over. And the world too. Like half the world thinks it's over, half the world thinks it's not.
Yeah, I want to ask you though. Like, I haven't been super tied into what like you guys at 12 Stone have been talking about, but I haven't heard a whole lot on the political front this time around. Like what's been the word as far as like 12 Stone sort of shepherding its people? Because some churches, even right there in Atlanta, some other churches are very intentional about using their platform to leverage a certain political agenda. I don't pick that up from 12 Stone just at a glance, but maybe I've missed something. What's been the approach as far as reconciling politics and pastoring and the church and all that? How's that been rolling out for you guys?
Well, we definitely choose pastoring over politics for sure. And we don't, and intentionally, and I would say Kevin is decidedly and is very clear about this, that we are just not going to be a political church, and we're not going to get up on the stage and say, here's who you should vote for. Because it is absurd to think that all believers are one side or the other, or one party or the other. And there are believers across the board. And everybody, especially in this election, I think we'd probably be willing to say this here. I mean, no one really felt like we had great options.
Really?
Like no one really went. I mean, how do you even, as a leader or pastor, get up and say, hey, vote for this side, when there's just no great option. And there's no option that you can point to and say, you know what, it's really, really godly and holy over there on that side, so let's all go there.
Yeah.
What we have chosen to do is make the most of an opportunity to teach some sound and grounding theology, how to navigate the landscape of such differing values, even inside of the kingdom, how you wisely interact with people, how you wisely speak to things. And we've chosen to, and this word has almost become a hot button word, but we've chosen unity, and we'll say unity over hostility. And even collectively as a staff in church, chose to refrain from anything that would be considered highly political or hostile online, or anything, because everything right now is so sensitive. With the best of intentions, you can insert a wedge, and it completely unnecessarily. And the way that it's going to get solved, or the way to solve the division, is not going to come through honestly picking a political side.
Yeah.
And so I've really loved that we've taken the stance of, here, we're going to give you biblical theological tools for you to navigate this in your relationships, for you to navigate this as you're out in the world and in the workplace and in your family, and for you to make the decisions that you feel like the Lord leads you to make. But like, let's not mistake that either way this election goes ultimately, and who knows if it's actually over. I mean, ultimately, no matter which way it goes, neither way is giving glory to the Lord. So God's kingdom and expanding God's kingdom is the priority.
It has to be. I think it has to be. I watched one of the two presidential debates for about 20 minutes, and I was just like, I was sitting there. I felt in one sense sad for not just America, the whole world, because I think frankly, like every country should get at least one vote, because it affects us. It affects us. But I was watching and I was just like, how in the world does probably inarguably the greatest human civilization, the greatest nation that's ever been designed and created in human history that we know of, how on earth are these two guys like the options? How is this a thing? How do we, with all this smart, brilliant, energetic young people, not necessarily young, I mean like just normal middle age, like 40,
I know.
I'd take a 65-year-old, I think, how is this the thing? But it's interesting though. It's not lost on me that it's like it happened. This election happened in 2020, and like as a Christian, I've been thinking a lot about what is God doing to the church, to believers, in trying to make us more mature and to get us a step further toward His design and His image, His dream for the church. And I don't think that dream is tied into a political party or even like the flourishing of a national banner, and I think that's been a hard thing, especially for American Christians and Canadian Christians, because both of our countries right in the fabric is Christian values. It's there, and prayers were there, and it's been very hard for the church to separate their faith and the kingdom from the flourishing of their nation. Like, when you pray, I went to a prayer summit at where basically our country was founded on Prince Edward Island, and we were praying there, and like we were praying the prayers that the founding fathers prayed, like, which is really cool. Like, we're praying out of the Psalms where it says like He'll have dominion from sea to sea. Like, that was literally prayed over the country of Canada from the beginning. And so it's understandable in the same way in the US. I mean, the value system is built on Christian ethics, but it gets really complicated for people to separate, like, is God's agenda to bless America, or is His agenda to maybe use America as a tool of blessing? But it's a very complicated thing for people to try to navigate, because I do think God blesses nations that fear the Lord and nations that put His value system. You don't have to be a believer to do if you do the things that God says to do, it's going to bless you at some level. You don't have to even believe He's real. Follow the 10 Commandments, you're going to be better off for it.
Right. And I think this is revealed I think I knew it, and I would say I grew up this way, and it's just been in the last few years I've seen, maybe this isn't what we're supposed to do, is to apply an American nationalism hermeneutic to everything, and to and I've seen so many leaders across the church in America feel either both celebratory or hopeless at the result of an election, or depending, like, it's crazy, like how
neither of those
that gets communicated.
Yeah. And neither of those could be the right reaction, right? Like yeah.
I know. So it's been fascinating just to watch. I think, again, another a very clear revealing of what is actually under the surface, and probably what has been under the surface for so long.
Yeah.
And then, here you've got also, like, when you talk about, well, founded on Christian principles, I was at a roundtable discussion on race up in DC recently. And like that statement alone causes a number of people to stand up and go, oh, wait, no, we weren't. Actually, our country was founded, on slavery, one of the greatest sins, and so that what's also been revealing is, America's divided in so many ways, but even the way we view our history and the way we view our founding and has been incredibly divisive.
Yeah.
That's the reason I was at that table, is because we've got all this division with race. And they brought this roundtable together of people to talk about the church's response to it. And you've got white people at the table, black people at the table. And one white guy, like 60-year-old white guy says, well, we need to get back to our biblical principles. Oof. And I thought some of those, black pastors are going to come up out of their chairs, because of just the different view.
Yeah, it's really one of the words I've been like a word I've been thinking a lot about from not just my own life, but especially from when I think about our church community and Christians today, is like nuance, and like there's so much division, which basically brings these, frankly, very complicated conversations down into like just a couple binaries where it's either this or that, and it's
yes.
Like, I don't think there's, I deleted it. I had a post I was going to put on Instagram during election day for the U.S. I was going to say, let's just not blindly support the narrative that if you vote for Trump, you're racist, and if you vote for Biden, you don't love freedom. Like, it can't be that simple. Yes. It just can't be that simple. And it's like, especially as Christians, we've got to dive into the complexity and the nuance, and then learn how to apply the word and Christian values through that, and realizing there's probably not going to be any perfect answers that just thread the needle, just so. Right. But, one of the things and I'd love, like, what do you think is a positive response, or like, how should the church be responding, at least in this political conversation, which we can connect the race issue that's going on, like all these, what should the church be most concerned with, I guess, is what I'd like to ask you. I've been thinking about that. Like, what's most important? Because if you listen to, church leader X, you might think that the most important thing is that we vote in a way that's pro-life. Or if you listen to church leader Y, the most important thing is that we vote in such a way that, affirms black lives, or whatever. And it's like, what should the most important thing be? I think maybe that's a poor way of asking this question. Let me ask it like this: what are the things that drive your processing? The most weight, I guess. What we put the most weight on?
Yeah, I would say there's a couple things. The first thing I would say is I have learned that myself. Or for myself, that I was not nearly as educated as I thought I was in some of these things. So part of my response has been just to get educated. So rather than blanketly making assumptions about, what is pro-life or not pro-life, or where is racism from or not from, or when they say systemic, what does that actually mean? And like, I've really had to be willing to do some work and not just rely on either what I've been taught, throughout my life, or what I've seen on the media, or what prominent leaders might be espousing. Like, really do work, to study, read, and learn.
So because you mean these things, share memes that share your case, and that kind of work.
Like, it's little things, like people would say, when it comes to racism, I'm not racist because, I don't have a problem with Black people, right. But not really doing the deep thinking and having the conversations or doing the reading to go, that's not what the Black community is saying. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not limited to that small and that simplistic
Right.
of a thing. And so I just really, and I was honestly so surprised at all that I didn't realize and know.
Hmm.
And so I would say not just on that issue, but a lot of issues. I just, like, I wanted to understand, to vote Democrat, does that really mean somebody's pro-life? How does abortion get decided?
Mhm.
How effective, like, is
Yep.
it when we put a president in that is pro-life? I mean, those kinds of things, like, to really understand. So I would say that's part of the response. And
Yeah.
I think a needed response. And I think Christians, we can tend to be really lazy in that,
Yes. That's the word.
and not do the work,
Yeah.
because we get very dogmatic about a few distinctives,
Mm-hmm.
and because it sounds holy to
Right.
say that I'm not voting for a president that is pro-choice.
Yeah.
That sounds wonderful. But is that actually true?
Right.
Is it true? And so that's been fascinating to learn a lot more about. And then I would say, second, my response, and I think what I love about 12 Stone, our response is very strong on the building of God's kingdom,
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
and understanding kingdom and what that means. And so it's being aware, but it's also of the earthly kingdom we live in and being educated, but also the pursuit is God's kingdom,
Yeah.
and the expansion of his kingdom and what actually tethers you.
Right.
So I think both have been pretty critical, because I think in times like this, it's easy to lose sight of supernatural,
Right.
and when the natural is so loud.
Yes.
And so I think just staying tethered to the supernatural is so, so important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The idea of just like wanting to see God's kingdom established as our primary, like,
Yeah.
that's the thing we value more than anything. And we do have to, I don't think in the end, like, yes, if you read Revelation 7, like it says, every tribe, tongue, people, and nation, but it doesn't say like, and America or and Canada.
Yeah.
Like it's sort of
Yeah.
like the vision is these things all mold into the kingdom that God has established. And
Yeah.
I think you make such a good point about having to do the work. I mean, I think that's part of the problem is we get sucked into political narratives, like narratives that the media are driving and that sound right. But in actuality, when you do some research or listen to, like, have some relationships, like listen to somebody who doesn't have the same skin color or who doesn't vote the same way as you, and actually, that's what I find is like the part of the problem is these just like echo chambers we live in, where, and I mean, you did you watch The Social Dilemma? Did you watch that?
Yeah, I did.
Are you hiding? Are you hiding all of your kids from and yourself from?
Good
Crazy.
night. I mean, Jeff and I watched that together, and I was like, shut it all down.
I know.
Shut it down.
I know.
I know.
But it's
no
like
more.
But it just goes to show, like, even the way that you have come to your opinion, if you got it off Google, you can't trust that that's objective, because Google has served you what it thinks like what it thinks you want to hear. And Facebook serves you more of what not what you say you want to hear, what through advanced algorithms and knowing who you actually are, they keep serving things that reaffirm, your preconceived ideas. And it's like, if we have to break out of this vortex of superficial arguments that we share online, and it sounds right, but you don't, like, I had people back when the George Floyd thing happened, I sat down with some of my black friends and had a conversation in this format. And I had like white people from our church, which, and I would say historically, racism's definitely a thing everywhere. But it's not as embedded to our history as it is in the US. Like, we were the destination for the Underground Railroad. That's where you came here. Right. So it's not the same. However, I was shocked by the pushback I got from white people, like really pushing back against what these guys were saying. And my response was always, well, who are your black friends that are speaking into your life? You got to hear mine, and it's like,
right.
People don't have any. They don't have it. They don't have relationships that are informing different opinions, and they are just staying in the vortex of their little echo chamber that's continuing to reinforce their preconceived ideas. I think you make such a good point about having to do some homework and learn how to do that. Maybe that's a job for the church too, is to help equip people to be able to know, like, how do you even trust what you're learning online? I've had people push back against some of the Revelation stuff that I've been teaching through and preaching through the book of Revelation, because 2020. So,
right.
And, people pushing back and there's, they're saying they're pushing back against the arguments that I'm making. And I'm asking them, well, where are you getting your stuff? And,
right.
Well, Google, and from so-and-so from, Beaver Creek, Louisiana said that the rapture is going to happen on December 17th, 2021. So you better be ready, and it's like, where are you getting this? And so anyway, all that to say, the value of the church has got to mature, even intellectually. And I think we come across so hypocritical when we'll just blanket say, yeah, we're pro-life. I can't vote that way. Well, so does pro-life, does pro-life only mean abortions, or does that mean war? And does that mean, what about the capital punishment? Like where does that, you want to apply the spectrum of all life matters to a unborn child, which I agree, but okay, so an inmate life, or
and when you do the study and you actually look at history and the numbers of abortions over time and see that it hasn't mattered whether it's been a Republican or Democrat in office.
Yep.
Like, it hasn't really impacted whether they went up or down. That's a fascinating thing. But something we've been talking about lately, like to your point where you're, to being uneducated as Christians and to really trying to do the work to get educated. I find, and I work with, one of the things I lead is our young adults. And so these 20 somethings, right? And what I find even in the newer generations is that there's a very clear confusion as to what is biblical mandate and then what are personal convictions.
Right.
And so, if you have biblical truth at the top of the hierarchy, right? Like that's the foundation. And then you've got convictions under that, personal convictions, Holy Spirit-led convictions. Hey, this is how I want you to walk out this truth. You uniquely walk this out. And then preferences at the bottom. What I find, especially the younger ones that I work with, but then it's revealed itself to be, ageless over the last few months here in America, is that Christians want to take and just flip that hierarchy. And so you find Kevin, our pastor, kind of went viral for a little bit, but he made a statement, one of his sermons several weeks ago about how he's not for sale, politically, because people were pressing him so much to make so many political statements that he was just like, look, I'm not for sale. I'm not your politician. I'm your pastor. And because what was happening is people wanted to take their preferences and even their personal, even perhaps Holy Spirit convictions, like, the Holy Spirit convicted me that I needed, not me personally, but a person could say, I should go to a protest, and that's what the Holy Spirit asked me to do, and if our pastor or one of our leaders wasn't there, well, then they're not in alignment with biblical truth and mandate, which is not the case.
Right.
And so the confusion of what is personal conviction and what is actually truth. And it's so messed up right now, it would seem, amongst believers. And so we have all this division. And so there's a lack of understanding, lack of education in all of this, the lack of biblical literacy, just all of it in this big pot all stirred up. But people making very dogmatic statements and coming out and leading massive groups of people towards one end or the other with that as the recipe.
The interesting thing too is like the the Bible speaks so clearly to so many of the issues that we have, but we won't even stop and crack it open. We just go with, I think feelings and convictions are God for culture right now. And if I feel such and such a way, that is canon. And, and you insert whatever, pithy, politically charged statement. Love is love, right? The Bible actually says, no, love is not love. This is love, right? It actually says it. And love is love sounds right, but it's not. And there's so many of these things that sound right. And it sounds right. Yeah. Vote pro-life. Well, maybe to vote pro-life isn't as obvious as what you think it is. And it's just that it's such it's a real time, I think, for the church. I think you're so right to get into what is biblical truth, and I don't even know if the whole church agrees that we need to start there. That to me is the scary thing. Like, I've had a lot of painful conversations with people who've left our church because they think that we're too narrow-minded as for our certain views, whether it's on marriage and sexuality or what have you. And it always erodes at, well, look, let's crack open the Bible and you show me where I've got it wrong and I'll repent, right? And yet the conversations a lot of the time now aren't in that arena. They're in the well, I feel this, and Jesus would never, and and just kind of attaching our feelings to it. But
I was
go ahead.
So determined. Part of the last year for me, because honestly, you get in these conversations and I'm I'm not even sure what I'm saying. And I really wanted to go, I just need to know, what did Jesus do?
Right.
I mean, I've read the Gospels a million times, but I went back into it and was I need to know. I don't know if I've ever just specifically read through to see, what did he do with politics? What did he do with this behavior, that behavior? And I literally was just taking a highlighter and going, okay, I'm going to go through, and anything that describes the kingdom of God, here's what I'm looking at. And anything that, how did he respond? And I literally could not find where Jesus wanted to speak to specific issues or behaviors. It was always about identity.
Right.
It was always about, he would follow up, identity discipleship with oh, okay, and don't go sin anymore. Right. Or, those kinds of things. But it was always about the person being a son or daughter, and identity, and the least and the lowest. And he really was the person. It was the personification of love. But as I read it, I was why am I so confused? Because if I'm trying to figure out how to respond to every singular issue, I'm never going to lead like Jesus.
Right.
Because he was never a responder to every singular issue. He was well aware of them. Yeah. And would sometimes have that conversation give honor to Caesar, blah, blah, but sometimes he would have that, but only ever to get to the main conversation of identity. Yeah. Yeah. It was only ever I'll hit the softball so that you'll actually let me address the real issue. Right.
Now, can we talk about this?
Yes.
Yeah. And isn't that such a tool? I mean, that's been one of my big hangups, go back to the conversation around homosexuality. What a terrible thing that we've made this such a massive deal. Why are we starting with, well, can I or can't I be a Christian and practice this? Can we start with, who's Jesus and who are you? Right. Yeah, we can get into what the Bible says about this, but until we deal with the identity picture, this whole conversation is so secondary at some level. And I know that'll offend some people when they hear me say that, because I'm not changing what I think the Bible says, but I do think it's a major issue that we have. Again, like you said, we've made it the main pitch, and Jesus would very much, I think, speak to some deeper issue for any individual who's seeking to follow him. But it's an interesting dynamic. It seems like Jesus was always very what's the word, aware or driven by what he perceived the Father doing, and that never compromised or contradicted who the Father's revealed himself to be in the Scripture. And he was always very aware, I think, of his witness. I don't think Jesus ever did anything that would make him would send a confusing signal. Right?
Yeah, that's good.
It was always when you play back the Gospels, everything he did lined up with who he said he was and who he said the Father is. And I think that, to come full circle on this politics conversation, I think that's been my big wondering in all this. And I've had some pressure recently in our own kind of political system to take certain stands and put my name by candidate X, and I just won't. Part of it is because I don't think, what's the word? Like to do that calls into question so much of our witness. I think that's part of the problem with the American church in politics right now is I think there's a whole bunch of people that can't understand why Bill Clinton's character was a problem, but Donald Trump's isn't.
Yes.
Huh?
Well, but see, and I don't know how much time we have, because that opens a whole.
We got time.
That whole other thing. And one that I don't. I would say I'm on the beginning end of diving into educating myself and reading and really understanding what we are willing to allow in the character of a leader, as long as the leader does what we want them to do.
Right.
And as long as the leader produces what we want them to produce, and does things so that our bubble and our comfort level is not affected, we don't care what their character is. And not only do we not care, the number of Christians that say, well, I know he says these things, and I know I've heard Christians say horrible things about the president, and then there's a but.
Yep.
But he makes this decision, and that decision benefits me. And so, and I brought that up in a conversation the other day. And when I like what you said, I said, well, no Christians were excusing Clinton's behavior. And they said, well, because we didn't agree with Clinton's politics. Well, but this whole idea that when I say in the beginning end of this study of power and the intricacies of power.
Yep.
And what is power in the earthly kingdom and power in God's kingdom, and to just see how we have so confused the two.
Yeah, totally.
And
it's such a complex, I mean, it does require nuance. And I would say, and I thought, one of the best things I read over the last month, John Piper put out a piece on why he wasn't going to support Trump this election. And I thought he did a great job.
Yeah, I saw that.
Thought it was awesome. And then I read Wayne Grudem put a response out, which was equally as good on why he is voting for Trump. And then at the end, he said, he goes, and just for the record, John Piper is my friend, and I called him before I published this, and he helped me strengthen one of my arguments. So let's just, that alone was very refreshing, just to be like, okay, thank you for not shooting each other. But the complexity of all this, it's deep. And one of the things I heard, I think it was Eric Metaxas say in a debate I listened to, he was saying, Donald Trump isn't he said, he's a Trump supporter as a Christian. But he said, Donald Trump's like King Cyrus, right? That God is using him to accomplish his purposes, in many cases in spite of him or whatever. And I thought, okay, that's kind of a good analogy, but here's the problem with that. And here's, I think, the thing the church has to ask the tough question on is, the people of Israel didn't get a vote on Cyrus. Like they didn't put him there. Okay, if God did and God used him, but the problem with the church is the moment you have a power in a democracy that, Israel never had in Babylon, and like, as soon as you cast a vote, and I'm not advocating that you shouldn't either. I'm saying this is a really complex thing, but as soon as you cast a vote, you are at a deep level aligning yourself, and it's a scary thing to do that as a Christian. So I haven't envied you guys going through that, and we have our own issues here in Canada. We've got a potential election coming up, and everything that the church is terrified of about the left is already happening here. So we're 15 years.
I know.
Woke road.
Actually, you said that to me before, and that actually has many times brought me comfort. I thought, I remember Brent saying, "Hey, look, we're already where you guys are going, so it's totally fine, and we're still here."
The jackboots are at the door. They're going to shut this podcast down. We better go. I'm just joking. I'm just joking.
I know, but like I thought, so it's really going to be fine. But it's I think we've chosen not to be really political as a church too, because of what you just said. Then you have to align with a person.
Yep.
Like you have to choose a person that like I'm on their platform, and that's such a dangerous thing.
Yep.
And rather than unite the church, as some would say, it will cause further division.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me shift into one more final sort of question area I wanted to ask you about. It goes along with some of what we're talking about. It's just like, so what does we're talking about division. We're talking about, you were even at that thing in DC. What does reconciliation and equality look like? Let me tell a quick story, because one of my favorite Heather Semple stories of all time is when we were in Atlanta, maybe, I don't know, it's 4 years ago probably now, and they had the Wesleyan Church brought like a handful of the largest churches pastors down, and we were having conversations. You remember the panel? And
I do remember the panel. We were on it. Yeah.
Well, you were. Maybe I was too. Maybe I was the token young guy. Maybe that was it.
You were we joked because you were like, there's always a black guy, middle-aged white guy, a woman, and a Canadian or something like that.
The most international they had. But you like totally, it was just the most awesome mic drop moment I've ever beheld, because when it got to you, there was a question and you sort of exposed the truth that was going on behind all this. And it's like, we're not really here to talk about leadership. You really are trying to make a statement of diversity. And, I'm sitting beside the only black guy we have and the young Canadian guy, and I'm the token woman. And like, this can't be what, real equality looks like. Or this can't, like, that's what I really walked away from, was you really seem to resent, and I think rightly so, like resent that if you have me here because I'm a female, look, pick somebody else. And I don't want to sit here based on my gender. And like that, I think, is such a lost voice in this day and age about like, there is sort of a catch-22 on when we start talking about equality. And then if you start putting people into a certain position because of their race or because of their gender, that's as racist or sexist as it would be to exclude them because of their race or their gender. And I just thought, like, you've lived, as a leader, quite honestly, like that's a lot of the time as the only woman in a room full of alpha male dudes. And like, you probably have such an interesting perspective on having to have navigated. Now you're wired different than your average female. Like this
is true. You're
there. And that's the thing, you get in a room, like alpha people are alpha people. And like no one dials it back because there's a woman in the room, like that's never been the case with you. But like, I want to get your take on what are solutions? Like what does what does a real equality look like if the church is going to advocate for that? What does it look like for race? What does it look like for gender? Is it, I'm hoping it's more than just, okay, well, we better put a black guy on the panel, or we better put a woman on the panel.
Right.
What does it really look like in your opinion?
Well, and I would say my answer to this has evolved some over the last couple of years. I think that day that we were on that panel, I still agree with everything I said, but I think I've added a new layer. And the word reconciliation is interesting because reconciliation has to I always think of the story of the prodigal son. So you have a son willing to repent and you have a father willing to forgive. Both sides are required for reconciliation, repentance and forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when it comes to equality, there are two sides to it. And I used to really only advocate for one. I really only ever advocated for, and I sometimes I even chastise myself because I think I made it difficult for some women by just, saying to them, well, just be a good leader and then, you'll get picked and it'll be fine and just don't be dumb, and then you'll be invited to the table. And that's not always the case.
Right.
And so, and I was very strong against putting token people in. And really, like you said, resented deeply being a token. Here's where I'm landing. And I've been doing a lot of research in this lately too, just in the conversations with women and people of other races and what this all looks like. It really is going to have to be a reconciliation is a two-sided moving forward to the middle process. So, for example, someone invites me to something because they need a woman.
Yeah.
And I've had some degree of success and there's some trust in me that I'm not going to blow it up. And so I get invited to this seat because they need a woman. 5 years ago, I would have said, well, no, I'm not taking the seat because I refuse to be a token. Now I would say 100% take the seat, 100%. Because even though you may not feel you've earned it on the front end, you're going to have to earn it on the back end. Either way, you're going to have to earn it.
To hold it, yeah. And
the other side, the invitation, whether the invitation is done out of a motivation of optics or, this is what we have to do. I really do think that no matter the motivation, it's still the open door.
Right.
And the only way to really come together is for everybody to be willing to say yes to each other.
Yeah.
And to move forward in that. Yeah.
Do you think I think what you're saying is bang on, and I think there needs to be part of what reconciliation and equality looks like is for people who have had a place at the table to create spaces at the table for the voices that have been underrepresented, whether it is females or people of different skin colors or what have you. I think where it gets sticky though for a lot of people is it's like creating opportunities is not the same thing as ensuring outcomes, right? And that's the catch. I think what maybe in the nuance of this conversation is, again, you're advocating for a relational approach, and I think that where we run into problems, this is probably why that day at that panel felt weird, was because they were really trying to bypass the actual relational component of this to hey, let's just cash some equality chips here, it's virtue it's virtue signaling is what it is, and that's really in the air of the times. Is like we want the appearance of being people who care about such and such a cause, but in actuality, when it comes down to paying the piper for it, I don't think a lot of us have a lot of appetite for it. But I like what you're saying on if a door opens, an opportunity opens, to take that and see it as an opportunity to advocate and to hold that space and create that space for, because you're totally right. I mean, I'm a basketball fan, so I'll follow the NBA, and there's a lot of people advocating to try to have make opportunities for more people of color to own NBA teams, right? And on the one hand, there's a part of me that would say, well, they have every opportunity that a white guy does, but the reality is they don't, because it's actually there's a pre-existing group of predominantly white CEOs and hugely rich individuals. So we have to actually create those spaces, but it's a very complicated dynamic, I think.
It is super complicated. And honestly, and I don't want to make light of the complexities, because it's just very complex. And there's a lot of factors that are at play, especially in larger churches, with men and women working together. And what does that look like? And what does change look like? And how do we do this? And do we just draw a line in the sand and then jump over the line, even though it will be quite polarizing initially? Do we take a slow approach? Do we? But I think one of the things, and this is kind of tied to the stuff that I'm kind of reading about when it comes to power, is I do think one of our tendencies is to let the people who currently remain in authority, which by and large in the church, are, middle-aged to older white men, make the decisions and tell those who are marginalized or have less a role what progress is, whether it's a race thing or a gender thing or whatever. So to make very small strides and steps, and then to inform, the Black culture or women or Hispanic, but look, here's what we've done, without inviting those voices to the table to express what might actually feel like progress.
Right.
That's just an interesting dynamic too, of who gets to speak into what progress in that arena is.
Yeah.
And so lately I've just wondered, because part of what I want to do that I never thought I would ever do, and you can attest to this, you'd be like, you're doing what? Because can't believe you would do that, is do some writing and some developing specifically for women on how to be a woman in leadership in the church. And there really isn't an insider that has written anything of substance directly towards the female leader.
Yeah.
There's stuff for churches on how to do it, things like that. But how do you exist as a woman? What do you do? How do you respond? How do you cut through the confusion and actually do this?
Yeah.
And do you take the seat? Do you have that conversation? How do you carry yourself? What should you chase? What should you not chase? What are the things nobody will tell you because it's not PC? All those kinds of things.
That's awesome. It's encouraging to hear how you're owning your voice and the window of opportunity that God's given you, even to speak into that area. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, there's probably a level, the personality that you have that got you to where you are, as a leader, which is it's a unique and unusual, honestly, not very many women have grown a church up over 1,000 people or beyond. That's a very unusual, not your normal thing. But I think the party, to go back to that day where you're sort of pushing back a little bit against being the token female, part of that's probably just from still sensing the, I'm here on my own right. I'm not here because I'm a girl and I'm here, I made it, and you did, right? But there's a maybe a maturing in God, getting you comfortable with your own unique voice. There was probably, you had to scrap and claw to get to where you were, and no one was handing that to you. And you didn't get in that room because you were a token, but once you got in that room, then it was like, well, let's try and pretend like we're diverse here. And it's like, there's like the five people, and then there's 40 other white dudes sitting watching, the one woman, the one black guy, the old guy, and the young international kid, and so, but part of it was like, so part of it was probably just still like, you're in this zone of being accepted as equal in a context like that. But at a certain point, if you stay in that kind of scrapping mode, you're actually ignoring the opportunity that you have to be a lifter and to like be a person that, okay, you weren't afforded that. No one gave you that space, but you now can actually bring female voices to the table in a way that no man could. And that to me is such a kingdom picture to sort of.
I felt like the Lord went, stop fussing about it.
Yeah.
And like, just do something about it. Like, I want to tell women, like, stop waiting on the men to make you feel comfortable in a meeting. It's your job. Wow. It's your job to make the room comfortable with your presence.
Yeah.
Like those kinds of things that like nobody will tell them. Like, because it's not, a man can't tell them that.
Yeah.
A man can't look at a woman and go, you know what, you just need to buck up and make every other man in the room comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I could say to women, look, like this, when you're in uncharted territory and you're like on a ship with people, and you're the only one that has any real sense of what it is like, or how to get there, you have to say something.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and so you can't go into a room with people that have never experienced a woman in the room and think that they know what to do with a woman in the room.
Right.
So we can't ask to be led if we aren't willing to lead the way. And anyway, so those kinds of things that I just want to be like, okay, ladies, like, here's what it means. Like we bear like it or not, fair or not, we bear the responsibility of helping lead out. And the more women wait for everybody else to do what we think they should do, we're just going to stay in this situation.
That's it.
So
yeah,
I think, and that's why I say it's both the Father and the Son. It's like, it's both, and right now, but I just generally think, not just gender, I think a lot of things, the group that feels diminished is angry that the group in authority or power doesn't fix it.
Right.
And while there should be intentionality in that, there also has to be a leadership savvy that is imparted to help the group that feels diminished know how to move the ball down the field.
Yep. Yeah. It's both, right? Like the Father's responsible and the Son's responsible to,
right.
Yeah. It's huge. Heather, we've gone over an hour, so and I'm sure we could talk much longer, but I want to honor your time and thank you. Thank you.
So fun.
You should do it again sometime. You can.
Yes.
Token female guest again.
Anytime. I'll be the token on your podcast anytime. Happy to be that.
You certainly aren't a token female on my podcast. As anybody who has been following my podcast has now well realized, I don't, probably to a fault, I need to maybe think a little bit more about diversifying. But I just talked to my friends. I talked to who I want to talk to.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. Yeah.
You're on the list. So yeah, thank you so much for being part of the podcast today.
Yeah, well, you're my friend, but you're also a leader. I just have such tremendous respect for. Like, just such huge, big, mad respect for what you're doing.
Thank you.
I love it so much.
A ton. Thank you. Hey, thanks so much for listening today, everyone. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Heather as much as I did. Hey, if you haven't already, I'd love it if you'd share this podcast with a friend, maybe take a moment and leave us a rating or a review if it's positive anyway. If it's a negative, keep it to yourself. But otherwise, hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next time.